This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
And this is Father Gregory Pine.
Welcome to Godsplaining. A big thank you to all of our listeners and especially our Patreon supporters who support us with monthly gifts. If you would like to join that group of supporters, please check the link in the description in the show notes to this episode. And please follow us on all the social medias and share this episode with those that you think would enjoy it. Father Gregory, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Oh, we're doing it. We're doing it.
Nice. You didn't answer the question.
Exactly.
Strategic evasion.
Which actually might lead us into the episode.
It could potentially lead us into the episode.
Yeah, there might be a part of that.
The people back at home are saying, like, are they going to get into the episode within 1 minute? That would be an all-time high, or that would be an all-time low, or that'd be a record of a certain sort.
All-time low. Yeah. Anyway, that reminds me of the John Bellion song, All-Time Low.
I don't know that song, but I'm interested.
I'm a big John Bellion fan.
What's described to me the vibe?
I
mean, I've only ever come across like John Bellion on a Millennium track. So like things that fall within the kind of EDM ambit are things about which I'm somewhat aware, but that's it.
Yeah, he's kind of like EDM techno, not techno, gosh, that's a horrible way, but he's definitely a really singer-songwriter. His album called The Human Condition is, I think, one of the best like start to finish albums. Really good. He's from Long Island. Okay, so he has this kind of Long Island, New York vibe to him and things. And a really good musician. But we're talking like heavy beats, kind of with some hip hop influence in it as well. But that's not our episode today.
That's not.
No, but we'll deal with it.
But the people were asking, so
yes.
People needed to hear.
And before we get into the episode, I actually have a really great listeners. So we're going to invite. So when I was a chaplain at the University of Virginia, one of the big things that we did was we really encouraged our students to get involved in a Bible study. And it was one of our greatest successes. I remember when I left the ministry earlier this year, we had over 42 weekly Bible studies. And it was a great sign of the health of our ministry. And so I want to kind of extend that invitation to you, our listeners, about how to join a Bible study, how to grow in your faith and encounter Christ in the Scriptures. So this Advent, there will be beginning a Bible study that's really a unique one and unlike any others. It's called Bible Across America. It will be a national-wide Bible movement that's spearheaded by our friends over at the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology, which we're big fans of, and they're great collaborators. Beginning on November 7th of this year, 2025, Catholics across the country will gather in their homes and parishes every single Wednesday night for an event at 7:30 p.m. And together, they'll experience Christ in the Scriptures and begin to build up this kind of modern movement of the current modern-day disciples and building each other up so that we can go and meet others, meet Christ in others, and bring them together from a Bible study or from the heart of a Bible study. The study will be led by Dr. Shane Owens, who is a professor of theology at Franciscan University of America. And he'll also have others. Did I say Franciscan University of America?
You did.
Yeah, Franciscan University of Steubenville, but soon to be America. Hey, if we can rename the Gulf of Mexico America.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I'm
anyway,
a proud alumnus.
I will love it. Yeah. We both are, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Shane Owens will have others joining him for these Bible studies, including Father Boniface Hicks, Heather Kim, Alex Jones, Katie McGrady, and many others. So the Bible study will go over the course of 7 weeks and be focused on kind of Christ as teacher, Christ as Lord in those ways. So we invite you to join this national movement, join Bible Across America, and join these Bible studies. You can find out more information at stpaulcenter.com/Advent. All right. Well, as we mentioned a little earlier, you said, "How am I doing?" And I said, "We're doing it." I think there are many times where maybe that is the kind of disposition, or maybe our current state of prayer life, where it's just like I'm doing it and I'm going through it. And what we want to talk about on this episode is kind of those periods of prayer where maybe it's dry. Right, we've all had those. We've had great moments of prayer of like consolation, but maybe there are moments that are a little more desolate, or experiencing desolation or dryness in that. So we want to have this conversation about what does it look like with dryness in prayer, because it's a real thing, and I think we would be naive to think that prayer is always going to be this, weighted blanket that just hugs us at every single time we get under the covers of prayer. But it's not. And sometimes it's dry, and sometimes it's a little scratchy, and keeps you awake at night. So we're talking about prayer and dryness in prayer. Can you describe a little bit of our experiences or what's typical in that way?
Yeah. So I think that one consideration to kind of get out there at the outset is that we introduce kind of evaluation in a way that might not always be helpful.
Okay.
So I think the fact of the matter is that not only do we want to have good prayer, but we want to have verifiably good prayer.
Okay.
Because how else are we going to judge the prayer's goodness apart from our verification thereof? But the basic idea is that we want to have a sense of our own efficacy. So it's not just a mere matter of being present to the prayer, doing the things associated with the prayer. We also want to have the thoughts and feelings that we imagine should accompany it. And so, especially if we have had experiences where we're locked in, where we're really focused, maybe where we've experienced some spiritual gifts of a more sensible sort, whether they be tears or inspirations or otherwise. But then if we find ourselves in a different situation in which we're very easily distracted, or maybe we're just kind of fixated on something that takes us away from the experience of prayer, or maybe we're just finding it kind of distasteful, even repugnant to sit in prayer, right? Then we think to ourselves, this must be my fault, or there must be something wrong here.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the case, but also maybe that's not the case. Or at the very least, we need to clarify the way in which we evaluate, like the quality of the prayer, before we start making big moves or before we start kind of changing up the scene. So that would be like my first thing is just to kind of sensitize it to the fact that we're really into evaluation.
Yeah.
And sometimes our desire for good prayer as, like evaluated as such can be it can introduce a kind of pressure into the system.
No, I really appreciate that. And I haven't really thought about like the fact that we are kind of obsessed with evaluating our prayer life in many respects, and that it has these different qualities to it, and it kind of ebbs and flows. And I think that can be kind of discouraging sometimes for people, because it's like it should always be good. Like prayer is good, right? So why does it sometimes have these different qualities that maybe are distasteful or that help us, or that we're struggling in that way, but that we are kind of always thinking about, okay, I did my prayer. Was it good prayer or was it bad prayer? Instead of just looking at the act itself. You know what I mean? And so as we talk about like qualities of prayer, if we're talking that prayer does have different qualities at different times, that means it can change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, just to kind of, again, having the backdrop, what is prayer? Prayer is just the raising of one's mind and heart to God. We think especially of it in terms of the raising of one's mind, because prayer is an intellectual act. The corresponding volitional act is devotion, right? So devotion is the prompt offering of one's heart, whereas prayer is the raising of one's mind. So what you're responsible for, in effect, in the life of prayer is thinking and choosing in God's direction.
Okay.
All right? You can do that better or worse. Cognizant of your own strengths and weaknesses, there might be more kind of scripture or spiritual reading involved, or there might be more silence involved. Whatever shape it takes, it's going to involve some manner of adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, supplication. We have that helpful acronym ACTS.
Yes.
But I think that, we are committed to a life of prayer. We seek to inform ourselves or to catechize ourselves such that our prayer be more substantive, that it respond more generously to God's offer of himself. Nevertheless, we do observe these changes, and then the question is, from whence do they come? And I think you've got three main sources: from God, from ourselves, or just from life. All right? Life being an extension of ourselves, but nevertheless, I think
kind of
we
like
can helpfully
circumstances that surround us.
Yeah.
Right?
So prayer is a relationship between us and God.
Right.
Right. So it's either he's changing, I'm changing, or the things surrounding this relationship are changing. Yeah.
And all those are kind of fair game.
Yeah,
because
I think
when we're looking at prayer, we're looking at all of these different factors. Like you said, it's actually an interpersonal relationship.
Exactly.
Which is really important.
Yep.
Right. So it's going to involve two different people, but also things that surround them as well.
Yeah,
looking at the changes then.
Yeah.
If we're let's start with one of those two people.
Yeah, exactly. Let's start with God.
The big guy, the big God. If does he change?
So yeah, I mean,
pretty
people
sure
ask this question. No, he doesn't. Yeah,
there it is.
So God doesn't change in himself. All right, and I mean, people who have watched Godsplaining stuff from yesteryear will know that we did an episode, I think, at one point on divine simplicity.
Yeah.
So God is simple in the sense that he's not composed of parts, or he's not divided in himself. So he doesn't have a before and an after. He's eternal. He embraces his whole life simultaneously. Nevertheless, we can observe certain changes in God's plans. Not in that the original plans weren't good and the subsequent plans are better, or, whatever other formulation of that you'd like to trot out there, but in the sense that God does different things at different times. Okay. So like God is pedagogical in his dealing with mankind. And you can think about this in terms of our first parents, the fall, the way in which God taught us through the natural law, the way in which God taught us through the old law, that is the Mosaic law, the sending of our Lord Jesus Christ, the way that God is teaching us now with the new law, that is to say the evangelical law. So like we can see a pedagogical purpose in his love designs. And it's not because he's changing. It's just because he knows us and he loves us and he adapts the unfolding of his will to our actual historical state.
That's so important. And I want to like really kind of just really drill this into place, that when we talk about like God himself isn't changing, it's like, and he's not necessarily changing his plans. Like, okay, because when I change my plans, it's because my first intention, like I didn't accomplish it or something, and maybe I failed at it. So I have to go back to the drawing board and change my plans up, right? Because it's like, what's the definition of like craziness? Insanity. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing twice, expecting a different result. Yeah. So I changed my plans because I failed. Now, God's not necessarily changing his plans because he failed in a certain way, right? But I think you're so good in saying that like he has a certain pedagogical unfolding of his will. Yeah. And he may do different things at different times. But that's not because plan A failed and he had to go back to the drawing board, right?
No, it's just because of our state. God is trying to instruct us in a way that we can take on board, in a way in which we ourselves can appropriate. And it may be that initially in our prayer lives, we profit from a lot of consolation, or we profit from the experience of abundance, so as to kind of return us to that practice with greater fidelity. But it also might be the case that we don't need that. In the sense that, what is the life of prayer about? Well, it's about faith, hope, and charity. Yeah. Faith is of things unseen. Hope is of things not yet possessed. And charity abides from now into eternity. Nevertheless, God wants us to grow in that life, which involves some modicum, at least, of obscurity. We see now as if through a glass darkly. Right. And so I think that we can depend upon God to teach us throughout the course of our life in a way that grows us in faith and that grows us in hope and that grows us in love. And there's a real risk that if prayer is always delightful, that we go to God for his gifts and not for himself, who is the giver, and that there can be a kind of tension introduced into the spiritual life where we value, the good things which derive therefrom more than God himself, who is good beyond compare. So I think that's like, it might just be that God is teaching us something. That's the first point. Yeah.
So when we talk about, okay, like maybe there's dryness in our prayer, or that prayer changes, right? And then we talked about it's interpersonal. And what are the quote unquote changes that are legitimate from God's side, right? From that other person that's involved in here. So I think understanding that it's more about like a pedagogical unfolding of his plan, that he's going to do different things at different times with respect to our lives and our own prayer lives. And that makes a lot of sense in that way.
And God makes all things work to the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So his designs are good, his plans are good, his interaction with us is good. We can be confident in that.
Okay. Let's switch to that second person.
All right. That would be ourselves.
That's right. Do you change?
Yeah.
Have you ever changed?
I have changed. Yeah. I used to have hair on the top of my head.
I was going to say, now you have it on your face.
On the bottom of my head. Yeah, exactly. So I think that when people, again, start with the experience, you had good prayer, now you have bad prayer, or at least you would describe it in those terms, right? Whether we're going to affirm that assessment or not. And you just assume like, maybe I'm doing something wrong. That could be the case. Yeah. It also could not be the case. So we might be changing, and we just assume that when you're changing, you're either getting better or you're getting worse. It could also be the case that you're just getting older, or that you're just getting different, in the sense that like, I don't know that we're able always to assess. We're always like able to take our own spiritual temperature and get decent indication as to whether or not we're growing or not. And I think that we can be a little bit agnostic about this.
I think that's really important because like I cannot necessarily self-diagnose when I have a fever. Like I'm not able to like show up at the doctor's office and say, I'm sorry, I have 101 temperature. Like I have to actually have a foreign object, a thermometer that actually takes my temperature. I can say I don't feel great right now. I probably have a fever, but I don't know exactly what that fever is. And I need kind of something to to reflect that. So this kind of ability to take our own spiritual temperature, sometimes we can say, okay, something's not right, but we have to kind of pause and maybe have a different way of actually giving us the specifics of maybe what's changed or what's not right in that moment. You know?
And so, it might be the case that we are getting worse, or it might be the case that the circumstances of our lives are becoming less propitious or less suitable for the life of prayer. And I think it's good to be on the lookout for those things. So examples would be like, am I getting overly busy? Am I getting overly distracted? Am I getting overly sad and angry? Am I getting overly unforgiving and resentful? Because there are these types of things which can kind of gunk up our spiritual life if we're not addressing them, or if we're not digesting them, or if we're not working our way through them. So I think like we can't be just kind of undiscerning in our use of technology. We can't be undiscerning in our assumption of commitments. And when things go on emotionally and psychologically, which are weighty, which are like tough, we need to be attentive to that, and we need to like work through it, whether with friends or clinicians or whatever it is, spiritual directors, just to be attentive to the fragility and the volatility of our human state.
Yeah, I think talk through those symptoms a little more, right? Like you said, like there are some symptoms, like maybe I'm starting to get a little more angry, or I'm prone to any of the vices, right? And their different manifestations, but those are sometimes symptoms of something else, right?
So I know in my own experience, so I leave my cell phone in my office,
right?
And so I don't see it from between like 9 p.m. and typically 8 a.m. But I typically, so like I say, a holy hour before morning prayer and mass. Morning prayer and mass is at 7, so holy hour starts at 6. I typically get up at 5:30, and sometimes if I'm efficient in the morning when it comes to preparation, I'll have like 7 minutes before I want to be in the chapel. And like on a good day, I'll just bop into the chapel early, and I'll have like a 67-minute holy hour. But sometimes if I'm really busy, I think to myself, well, it'd help if I just bopped into the office, turned on my phone, turned on my computer, saw what the email inbox looked like, saw what the like iMessages and WhatsApp messages look like, so I have a sense for how the day is going to take shape and whether or not there's something here that merits kind of immediate response. But that almost never goes well, because then like I don't actually have enough time to troubleshoot a problem.
Right.
And it just gets me thinking about those things. And often I show up in the chapel at 6:01 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 because I get overly involved.
And then so the rest of your prayer, you're just obsessing about whatever perceived problem that you couldn't really handle in 5 minutes.
And I'm just not there. So I think that like that just reflects when life gets busy, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we require better boundaries, or like when it comes to technology, that we just don't have the control over that technology, which we might imagine we have. It owns us more than we own it, if we're being honest. So I think it's like you can kind of check the symptoms of your distraction or of your addiction or whatever it is, and then try to attend to them. When it comes to like sad and angry, or when it comes to like unforgiving and resentful, that can be harder, but I think it's helpful just to ask your friends, like
that's,
like what am I struggling with right now? I can't see it for my own. I can't see it for myself. And people will tell you, like I've known about myself over the course of like the last 5 years that I've been angrier than I have in the past. Like I'll find myself being especially frustrated with obstacles or with hindrances, and especially with people, because it's like in my estimation at this stage of the game, they're purposefully trying to annoy me, or so it seems. That's typically an indication of something that's wrong with me more so than with them. So it's like, okay, what's the next step? It's typically forgiveness. And again, these things are related. Relationship to technology, relationship to busyness. I need to create space in which for people in their messiness, to abide, or like to have a home. Yeah. And so, that's all related.
And I think when we, I always talk about good friendship, virtuous friendship as being almost a mirror. Like a friend can reflect back to you kind of who you are, that you can, like, there are certain aspects of my face that I can never see. Like I used to wear contacts, and occasionally I do still wear contacts, but in order to put my contacts in, like I cannot see my eyeball unless I have a mirror that reflects it. So like there are times that there are parts of ourselves that we can't see unless somebody or something reflects it back to us. And so when we feel that we have changed, and maybe the change isn't necessarily a positive one, having good virtuous friends that can help reflect back to us who we are, and to understand, okay, that might be some of the issue, is a very positive and good thing. Right?
For sure.
So,
so I was just going to say, like, sometimes it also might just be the case that you're doing better.
Yes.
Like I just don't think that we can look past that fact, Because again, we said that the point here, the point of the life of prayer is to worship God, and that we gain access to God through the theological virtues. So we're focusing especially on faith, hope, and charity. And we said that faith is of what is unseen, charity is what is not yet possessed. And we didn't really. Did I say that right?
No,
faith is
no.
what of
Hope
unseen.
is
Hope is of what
not
not yet possessed, and charity we've kind of glossed over to this point. But the basic idea is that we're thinking especially about growth in faith, and so we have to be comfortable with a certain amount of obscurity. And I think that that's part of our maturation, is to be more and more comfortable with the obscurity of living here on the surface of the earth, rather than having an overly facile explanation for everything. We need to be content with the fact that the things of God and the unfolding of our lives, under the light of eternity, is going to be, it's going to be a riddle of a certain sort until such time as God unriddles it. So it might be that God entrusts you with this time of difficulty because you're ready for it.
Yeah.
Whereas formerly you needed milk, now you're ready for meat, and that's a completely appropriate transformation. And while we might prefer the former state, we have to come to prefer the latter state. Yeah.
I think too, understanding that I talk about this. We've talked about this a lot, though. That the great gift it is to be a human person, and that means that we are bodily. That we are not angels, and because we have this temporal bodily reality, that means we change. And there are spiritual changes too, because the human person is hylomorphic. And so we see the changes happening physically, but that also means we can change spiritually as well. Okay, well, let's then move to the third kind of realm of changes. We talked about in a prayer life, it involves two people, but also the circumstances around them, or the accoutrement around them. Let's talk about the life changes, because sometimes that is what initiates some of these prayer changes or struggles, and that results in a quote unquote dry prayer life.
Yeah. No, I think all of us are hoping for a life of semi-continuous progress or unstinting progress.
Yeah.
And maybe that happens and maybe it doesn't, but I think that what's more important is that we show up for our lives as they are given. And the fact is that they are given.
Yeah.
So there are circumstances over which we have no control. And that might be frustrating for us, even bewildering for us, but that's not the point, because we have to recognize the limits of our control and then conduct ourselves well within those limits.
Sure.
And so, maybe, you had a semi-monastic life prior to your marriage, and then you get married, and then you have kids, and then you just don't, know, and then you're thinking about 1,000 other things, and you don't have as much time to yourself, you don't have as much time to sleep, you don't have as much time to pray. And the question is, how can I do well with what I have, and how can I attend to these things, not as if there were obstacles to my life of prayer, but as they are now extensions of my life of prayer, even though my life of prayer is more modest. Or bad things happen.
Yeah.
You get sick.
Yeah, you
or
have a major illness.
Or somebody whom you love dies, and then you're just going to be dealing with that. People will talk about prior to the death of my mother, I didn't cry. After the death of my mother, that's all I do. I just cry. It's you just don't know how these things are going to affect you, and then they do affect you, and then you're just responsible for living your life in light of these changes. And so I think that sometimes it's me and God, we just assume God is always on. He's always just performing at operative capacity, or he's performing at maximal capacity, and then I need to always be performing at maximal capacity. That's where the analogy breaks down, because of these changing circumstances in life. We just might not be at our best. And God's not scandalized by the fact that we aren't at our best, right? It's not something he's like, wow, I was hoping that you would be better, and then here you are not being better.
So could you just be better?
Yeah, so God is giving us a grace, and he's stirring up within us a prayer that's appropriate to this time and to this place, given the actual circumstances of our life. So I think that that's another good thing to have in mind.
Yeah, I mean, one of the phrases I always used to talk to my college students about was, all God wants is kind of all that you have at this moment.
Yeah.
And you can't really get wrapped up in, I wish I had more to offer him, or, I was better last week or last month before this thing happened, and now I want to, white knuckle it so that I can give him what I think he is. No, it's what you have. And maybe what you have isn't, the most pristine, but he doesn't expect that. He expects just who you are then and there and at that time. And so, as these life changes, and there can even be legitimate changes of maybe you get a new job. That's not necessarily this big cataclysmic event and it's life changing, but maybe it's just the progression of life. We talk about our students who graduate college and go into professional life. That's just a natural progression of life, but that is a major change that also affects how they pray. And sometimes it's a very hard transition and they're filled with dryness in prayer and things like that. So when we're talking about somebody who, let's say, is experiencing spiritual dryness in their prayer, and we've talked about the 3 different points of changes, but let's wrap all of that up and say, okay, now what do we do with this? Like if you are experiencing dryness, what are maybe some of the, I want to say, takeaway points or actions that we can help us to persevere through dry moments of prayer?
I mean, we can return to the top of the episode and say, it's only so helpful to take your spiritual temperature. Because truth be told, you can't sense the life of grace within you.
Yeah.
You can get some indication of where the life of grace is leading on the basis of how you experience God's healing and how you experience God's growth. And we seek to channel that ever better. But I think the idea is that like all we have control over is showing up. So I think that like in the midst of dryness, that's a call or that's an invitation to a yet more perfect fidelity. Because now it's clear we're not just here in order to get the goods. We're here for God because God is worthy of all praise. And it might be the case that in showing up for God, there are certain benefits that redound to you, but they're of a secondary importance. That's not to say that they're not important. Like we should be cultivating a quietistic, pure love that is content to consign ourselves to the pits of hell, provided that we worship God. We're not crazy.
Wow. Okay.
Right? But like, if God is to be worshiped, then God is to be worshiped. So our prayer isn't just a matter of self-realization, all right? It's a matter of latria, and in the case of the saints, dulia, So I think what we want to focus on is just a kind of constancy or a kind of discipline in our approach to the spiritual life so that even cognizant of the changes that do take place, we aren't thrown for a loop when they crop up, so that our observance isn't so much a matter of just good thought and good feeling as it is a matter of good practice.
Yeah. When we talk about that fidelity in prayer and just kind of being consistent in showing up, I think it was Jacques Philippe in his book Time for God says, like, the best prayer isn't the one that we feel the best about. The best prayer is the one that we show up to. And just really emphasizing this fact that, like, we can't, or not can't, but the vast majority of times we do not perceive how grace is operative in our life. And we can shut out grace by not showing up. And even if we don't perceive it, we have to put ourselves in the place that grace is operative.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important. And then to actually, if we desire to continue to grow in the life of grace and virtue, that is a long-term project. But the only way to actually set out on that journey and in that project is to do the next step. And sometimes and I want to say it's not as reductionistic, maybe as we can perceive or think of at times, but maybe the best thing to do is just to say, okay, I'm going to take this 24 hours at a time and take your spiritual temperature, be honest with that, but just say, okay, it's what do I have directly in front of me, and let me grow in grace and virtue with what I have available. Where am I in this place? Who are the people in my life that I can pray for, and go about it that way. So maybe kind of shortening our vision at some times to say, okay, what's my next step, while still having a goal of perfect union with God in eternity, but knowing to get there is about each step along that way, and not making gigantic leaps and forcing ourselves to move from dryness to pure ecstatic prayer. But it's like, let's make one step then. It's about that kind of next step.
Yeah, and I think, this might be the last thing I say, but it's good for everyone to have something like a plan of life.
Yes.
So for us, when it comes to religious life, the form of life is prescribed to us by the Book of Constitutions and Ordinations of the Order of Friars Preachers, and that gives us a certain freedom to live the life rather than to invent the life. I think if we're constantly inventing our prayer lives, then we're at risk of infidelity. Because if you only show up for the prayer that you feel good about, you'll eventually just stop showing up to prayer.
Yep.
And so I think it's like you just have to show up for prayer. but we need to commit ourselves to something when it comes to daily prayer, when it comes to reception of the sacraments, when it comes to penance, when it comes to friendship, when it comes to study, when it comes to service of the material poor. Otherwise, we'll just let things go, and we won't attend to them with the same kind of solicitude which we ought. So I think like everyone should have a modest, just like simple type of thing that you can write down in 200 words, plan of life, so as to govern prayer and so as to give them a kind of certainty or confidence that their life is tending to God even if they don't feel good about it.
And I think there was a quote that was said to me at one point when I was, struggling with my own prayer life, and the priest said to me, he was like, that when you're trying to start a fire, dry kindling is the best thing. And there are times where maybe we feel like that the Lord's drying us out, and it's like that feels like torture, but that's so that the smallest spark can ignite the flames. And it's nice, a little kind of bumper sticker to throw out there at people or whatnot, but it has brought me a lot of kind of encouragement to be able to recognize and say, yeah, this is a period of dryness. But at a certain point, and I don't know when that is, and I cannot force that, but there will be a divine spark. And whatever dryness there is will be caught aflame with the love of Christ. And I don't enjoy this drying process, but I'm confident that at a certain point the divine spark will enter in and catch a fire. So it's an encouragement that like even when those dry moments happen, to continue on that plan of life, to continue to keep showing up, because the grace will persevere and carry us through that and ignite whatever was dry to burn with the love of God.
Beautiful.
So to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that it was helpful for you. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so that you can keep up to date with all of our videos, podcast episodes, and other postings and things like that. You can follow us on social media. That is at Godsplaining on all the social media platforms and things of that nature. And check out our website for upcoming live events. We're doing live events all over the nation and even the world. So if you want to come and meet the Godsplaining Friars, please stay up to date on which will be on our website. And we also have different merch and things like that if you want to kind of rep the Godsplaining crew with Godsplaining swag. All of that's on our merch store. So please thank you for all the support. Please continue to pray for us and know that we are praying for you. God bless you.
Father Bonaventure, what's your favorite version of the Bible?
Ooh, English Standard Version, Catholic Edition.
Okay, when was that published?
Sometime.
Okay, recently? Not too recently?
Yeah, some time ago.
Okay.
India uses it for the lectionary.
Okay. Do any other countries use it?
Nope. Maybe? Oh, England is going to use it, I think.
Are they really?
Random news.
This is great.
I don't know.
So other things that you want to share with people?
They should subscribe to Godsplaining.
Yeah, they should.